Hi, it's Sue. Thanks for joining me for today's Bible reading. Today I'm reading the second half of the book of Esther, chapters 6 through 10 from the World English Bible. And it is my passion to promote Bible literacy. I've been reading the Bible online now for about 6 years. And I believe that people do not know how life-changing this practice can be. More importantly, I want them to know the God of the Bible in truth, not according to all the rumors and hearsay about him, but who he really is. And you get that from the Bible. People make a lot of assumptions about God and his word because they've never read it all the way through. Even many who call themselves Christians and churchgoers have never read their Bible all the way through, and therefore their sense of God is distorted. Their sense of who he is and what the Bible's all about is distorted. Because until you read it all the way through over and over, you really don't have any idea how remarkable it is. Um, there are stigmas attached to the Bible out in society. It's because they don't understand what it is. They don't know. And people really should read it for themselves before they talk about it. And read it with the Holy Spirit. Read it with his help. It's designed so that God can show us his word. He's a teacher. He's the master teacher, and he wants to help us. In fact, I couldn't even understand the Bible at all until I gave my heart to the Lord, and it's like scales came off my eyes, and I suddenly could read it. I was even listening to a guest speaker here locally a couple years ago, and he said, just out of the blue, he said, I don't even think I've ever read it all the way through. And I about walked out. I mean, I understand that. I mean, before I ever read my Bible all the way through, I was ministering on the streets. God was using me and teaching me through that. And, I understand that you can do a lot of things without having read your Bible all the way through. I mean, but that's different. Why would you give the pulpit to someone to be a guest speaker who is going to teach the Bible without any kind of scholarly education to do that? It's just very important. So the Bible clears up a lot of foggy thinking, gray areas, um, so many, many things. It really addresses every aspect of life. It provides a comprehensive worldview. It engenders a stable disposition, peace, and hope. Who doesn't need that? So if you enjoyed this broadcast, would you share it with a friend who could use it? And also comment and let me know you're here, or even email me and request your free 1-year Bible while you're at it if you'd like one of them. So let's get to our reading here. Esther chapter 6, verse 1. On that night, the king couldn't sleep. He commanded the book of records of the Chronicles to be brought, and they were read to the king. It was found written that Mordecai had told of Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's eunuchs, who were doorkeepers, who had tried to lay hands on the king Ahasuerus. The king said, "What honor and dignity has been given to Mordecai for this?" Now, remember yesterday, or if you didn't hear it, okay, so what he's talking about here is these two eunuchs that were going to, when it says lay hands on the king, they were going to hurt him, kill him, whatever. And when it says on that night, this was in between the two dinners that Esther offered to the king and Haman. You really need to hear yesterday's to understand today's, but there was a decree. This dirty guy Haman, because of jealousy, talked the king into making a decree against the Jews. So they set a date that all the Jews are supposed to be killed. Basically, they're going to let everybody just ravage them, kind of like the ravaging that went on in Rwanda. And there's a good book, Left to Tell, that you can read about that. But anyway, horrible, horrific. And so Esther the queen is a Jew, but the king and nobody seems to know that. And her uncle tells her, you've got to talk to the king about this. You've got to do something. And so Esther invited the king. Well, she put herself at risk because if she came to the king uninvited and he didn't extend his scepter, she would be killed. But he did. And she asked him to come to a dinner, and he did, him and Haman. And then at the dinner, she asked him to come again the next night to another banquet she would make for him. And he agreed. So from what I can see, today's reading is in between. It's on the night after the banquet. So he happened to be reading through the history records and wanted to know what had been, what honor and dignity had been given to Mordecai, Esther's uncle, to honor him for saving the king's life. Now, see, The antagonist, Haman, who's jealous of Mordecai because Mordecai wouldn't bow to him and act him like he was all that, um, Haman wants to kill Mordecai. But here's God intervening now. Just so happens, coincidentally, quote unquote, that the king comes to mind to look in this book and see that Mordecai needs honored, which is going to be a stick in the rib of Haman, right? So anyway, he asks him, what has been done to honor him? Then the king's servants who attended him said, nothing has been done for him. Verse 4, the king said, who is in the court? Now Haman had come into the outer court of the king's house to speak to the king about hanging Mordecai on the gallows he had prepared for him. The king's servant said to him, behold, Haman stands in the court. The king said, let him come in. So Haman came in. The king said to him, what shall be done to the man who the king delights to honor? Now Haman said in his heart, who would the king delight to honor more than me? Haman said to the king, for the man who the king delights to honor, let royal clothing be brought, which the king uses to wear, and the horses that the king rides on, and the head of which a royal crown is set. Let the clothing and the horse be delivered to the hand of the one the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man whom the king delights to honor with them, and have him ride on horseback through the city square, and proclaim before him, thus it shall be done to the man who the king delights to honor. Then the king said to Haman, hurry and take the clothing and the horses you have said, and do this for Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the king's gate. Let nothing fail in all that you have spoken. Then Haman took the clothing and the horse, and arrayed Mordecai, and had him ride through the city square, and proclaimed before him, thus it shall be done to the man whom the king delights to honor. Mordecai came back to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and having his head covered. Haman recounted to Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had happened to him. Then his wise men and Zeresh his wife said to him, yeah, wise men, yeah, right. I'm sure it was more like the foolish men, his friends. But anyway, they said to him, if Mordecai, before whom you have begun to fall, is of Jewish descent, you will not prevail against him, but you will surely fall before him. So they understood that God, the God of the Jews, was nobody to mess with. But apparently Haman didn't know that yet, but he's about to find out. So they said, you'll surely fall before him. While they were yet talking with him, the king's eunuchs came and hurried to bring Haman to the banquet that Esther had prepared. So the king and Haman came to the banquet with Esther the queen. The king said again to Esther on the second day at the banquet of wine, what is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. What is your request? Even to the half of the kingdom, it shall be performed. Then Esther the queen answered, if I have found favor in your sight, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me at my petition and my people at my request. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for male and female slaves, I would have held my peace, although the adversary could not have compensated for the king's loss. Then King Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen, who is he, and where is he who dared presume in his heart to do so? Esther said, an adversary and an enemy, even this wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. The king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. Haman stood up to make request for his life to Esther the queen, for he saw that there was evil determined against him by the king. Then the king returned out of the palace garden into the place of the banquet of wine, and Haman had fallen on the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, will he even assault the queen in front of me in the house? As the word went out of the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs who were with the king, said, behold, the gallows, 50 cubits high. Let's see how tall that is again. 50 cubits, we just read it yesterday. 18 inches is 1 cubit. So if it's, let's say it's 20 inches and it's 50 cubits, it's 200 feet, right? Wow. So it says, behold, the gallows, 50 cubits high, which Haman has made for Mordecai, who spoke good for the king, is standing in Haman's house. The king said, hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath was pacified. Now, I don't remember now. I've read so many different versions. I mean, almost 40 years of this. So I thought I remembered, though, that he was impaled, not a gallows, right? Gallows is beheading, right? So you have yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if you know about that, put it in the comments. Maybe it says that in a different version or I don't know, some of the translations, I don't think use proper vocabulary when they translate them. But anyway, you have to look up the root word. For those that are new Bible, you have to look up, a good way is to look up the Strong's Concordance, Hebrew for the Old Testament, Greek generally for the New, and yeah, look up the actual word, and it'll give you a better idea of the meaning usually. All right, so it said, on that day, King Ahasuerus gave the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, to Esther the queen. Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. The king took off his ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So if that's not a God turnaround, I don't know what, only God can do this kind of thing. Verse 3. Esther spoke yet again before the king and fell down at his feet and begged him with tears to put away the mischief of Haman the Agagite and his plan that he had planned against the Jews. Then the king held out to Esther the golden scepter. So Esther arose and stood before the king. She said, if it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in your sight, and the thing seems right to the king, and I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to reverse the letters devised by Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to destroy the Jews who are in all of the king's provinces. See, the devil has always wanted to destroy them. He's trying to stop the godly line of the Messiah. See that? It's all about this from the beginning to the end, and to today even, and future. So this is same thing that Hitler was all about, right? Nothing new. Those aren't the only instances throughout the ages. Verse 6. For how can I endure to see the evil that would come to my people? How can I endure to see the destruction of my relatives? Then King Ahasuerus said to Esther the queen and to Mordecai the Jew, see, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he laid his hand on the Jews. Write also to the Jews as it pleases you in the king's name, and seal it with the king's ring. For the writing which is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring may not be reversed by any man. So they got a problem, because the king's word is final, right? So they got to figure out a workaround here. Verse 9. Then the king's scribes were called at that time in the 3rd month, which is the month Sivan, on the 23rd day of the month, as it is written, according to all that Mordecai commanded to the Jews and to the local governors and the governors and princes of the provinces, which are from India to Ethiopia, 127 provinces, to every province according to its writing, and to every people in their language, and to the Jews in their writing and in their language. He wrote in the name of King Ahasuerus and sealed it with the king's ring, and sent letters by courier on horseback, riding on royal horses that were bred from swift steeds. In those letters the king granted the Jews who were in every city to gather themselves together and to defend their life, to destroy and to kill and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, their little ones and women, and to plunder their possessions. On one day in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, a copy of the letter that the decree should be given out in every province was published to all the peoples, that the Jews should be ready for that day to avenge themselves on their enemies. So the couriers who rode on royal horses went out, hastened and pressed on by the king's commandment. The decree was given out in the citadel of Susa. Mordecai went out of the presence of the king in royal clothing of white and blue, and with a great crown of gold, and with a robe of fine linen and purple, and the city of Susa shouted and was glad. The Jews had light, gladness, joy, and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had gladness, joy, a feast, and a good day. Oh, that's great. Many from among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews had fallen on them. How about that? They became Jews. They became Jews. Think about that. Chapter 9. Now in the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the month, when the king's commandment and his decree came near to be put in execution, on the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to conquer them, but it was turned out the opposite happened, that the Jews conquered those who hated them. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king of Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who wanted to harm them. So that was a little parenthesis in there. I'm going to read it again and tell you where that comes. It says, on the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to conquer them, parentheses, but it was turned out the opposite happened, that the Jews conquered those who hated them, end parentheses. The Jews gathered themselves together in their cities throughout all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus to lay hands on those who wanted to harm them. No one could withstand them because the fear of them had fallen on all the people. All the princes of the provinces, the local governors, the governors, and those who did the king's business helped the Jews because the fear of Mordecai had fallen on them. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces, for the man Mordecai grew greater and greater. The Jews struck all their enemies with the stroke of the sword and with slaughter and destruction, and did what they wanted to those who hated them. In the citadel of Susa, the Jews killed and destroyed 500 men. They killed Parshandatha, Dolphin, Aspatha, Paratha, Adalia, Aridatha, Parmashta, Arisai, Aridai, and Vaisatha, the 10 sons of Haman, the son of Hamadatha, the Jews' enemy, but they didn't lay hands on the plunder. Oh, that's interesting. Because he told them they could plunder them, right? Take their bounty. But they didn't. On that day, wait a minute, my phone just beat me. Verse 11, on that day, the number of those who were slain in the citadel of Susa was brought before the king. The king said to Esther the queen, the Jews have slain and destroyed 500 men in the citadel of Susa, including the 10 sons of Haman. What then have they done in the rest of king's provinces? Now what is your petition? It shall be granted you. What is your further request? It shall be done. Then Esther said, if it pleases the king, let it be granted to the Jews who are in Susa to do tomorrow also according to today's decree, and let Haman's 10 sons be hanged on the gallows. I thought they just killed them. I don't understand that. 14. The king commanded this to be done. A decree was given out in Susa, and they hanged Haman's 10 sons. The Jews who were in Susa gathered themselves together on the 14th day, also the month of Adar, and killed 300 men at Susa, but they didn't lay hands on their hand on the plunder. The other Jews who were in the king's provinces gathered themselves together, defended their lives, had rest from their enemies, and killed 75,000 of those who hated them, but they didn't lay their hand on the plunder. This was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of that month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Now this is the Jewish tradition, the Jewish celebration of Purim, which is still celebrated today, if I have it right, and I think I do. And I can't remember what day it's celebrated on, so I wonder if this is the day, the 13th of Adar. Okay, so I just paused and looked up, and the Feast of Purim is on Adar 13th, which is usually in March, I think. So there you have it. So it's celebrated on the day that the slaughter was supposed to be, even to this day. Verse 18. Well, let me back up. It says, so this was done on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of that month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. But the Jews who were in Susa assembled together on the 13th and the 14th days of the month, and on the 15th day of that month they rested and made it a day of feasting and gladness. Therefore the Jews of the villages who lived in the unwalled towns make the 14th of the month of Adar a day of gladness and feasting, a good day, and a day of sending presents of food to one another. Mordecai wrote these things and sent letters to all the Jews who were in all the provinces of the king Ahasuerus, both near and far, to enjoin them that they should keep the 14th and 15th days of the month Adar yearly, as the days in which the Jews had rest from their enemies, and the month which was turned to them from sorrow to gladness, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and gladness, and of sending presents of food to one another, and gifts to the needy. The Jews accepted the custom that they had begun, as Mordecai had written to them, because Haman, son of Hamadatha the Agagite, the enemy of all the Jews, had plotted against the Jews to destroy them, and had cast pur, P-U-R, that is the lot, to consume them and to destroy them. But when this became known to the king, he commanded by letters that his wicked plan, which he had planned against the Jews, should return on his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore they call these days Purim, from the word pure, P-U-R. Therefore, because of all the words of this letter, and that which they had seen concerning this matter and that which had come to them, the Jews established and imposed on themselves and on their descendants and on all those who joined themselves to them, so that it should not fail that they would keep these 2 days according to that which was written and according to its appointed time every year, and that these days should be remembered and kept throughout every generation, every family, every province, every city, and that these days of Purim should not fail from among the Jews, nor their memory perish from their offspring. Now, let me pause for a second. I'm looking at my calendar for March 23, this past March. It was actually March 6th, Purim, and remember, it's evening to evening. The day starts in the evening. So the 6th was the eve of Purim, and the 7th, the 14th. So from the 13th in the evening to the 14th in the evening was the first day of Purim, and then it shows that it goes on again to the 15th. So that is 2 days from the 13th to the 15th, just like it says here in the Bible. So it's still celebrated today. 29. Then Esther the queen, the daughter of Abihail, and Mordecai the Jew wrote with all authority to confirm the second letter of Purim. He sent letters to all the Jews to the 127 provinces of the kingdom of Ahasuerus with words of peace and truth, to confirm these days of Purim in their appointed times, as Mordecai the Jew and Esther the queen had decreed, and as they had imposed upon themselves and their descendants in the matter of the fastings and their cry. The commandment of Esther confirmed these matters of Purim, and it was written in the book. Last chapter. That's very short. King, let's see, it looks like 3 verses. 10:1. King Ahasuerus laid a tribute on the land and on the islands of the sea. Aren't all the acts of his power and of his might and of the full account of the greatness of Mordecai, to which the king advanced him, written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Media and Persia? For Mordecai the Jew was next to King Ahasuerus, and great among the Jews, and accepted by the multitude of his brothers, seeking the good of his people and speaking peace to all his descendants. That's it for today's reading. I'll see you tomorrow. God bless you.